Hello and welcome to Moneycontrol.com. 24th of February will be 1 year of the war that began between Russia and Ukraine. A lot has changed since then. The world that we live in is very different from the world that was 1 year ago. Hundreds and thousands of people have lost their lives. Geopolitical equations and dynamics have changed. To put India's role and India's challenges in perspective going on from here, we have with us one of the foremost political economists in the world, Dr. Arvind Panagriya, also Professor of Economics at Columbia University and former Vice Chairperson of Niti Aayog. Dr. Panagariya, thank you very much. Great to have you in Delhi and to be doing this in person. What better timing to get a perspective from you, considering, like I was saying, that tomorrow will be the 1 year anniversary of the Russia-Ukraine war. India's had to do a very tough tightrope walk. We've diversified our energy basket, yet we firmly asserted that we are not for war. If the war persists, sir, what are the challenges that you see facing India, considering geopolitical tensions will rise further, considering this is a year when economies around the world will slow down? What should India brace itself for?
So, thank you, Shweta. First of all, very pleased to be speaking with you. And really great to be back in Delhi as always. Just with a small corrective, I was the vice chairman of the Niti Aayog, not the chairman. Prime Minister is the chairman, as you know.
Sure.
So you
misspoke.
Yes. Okay. So to your question, I think during the 1 year, particularly the issue of the Russia-Ukraine war, we have navigated incredibly well. Virtually on all aspects of it, we have continued our energy supplies at good prices, and in fact, even have benefited from the discounted prices that at which Russia has been selling us part of our supply, and at the same time, we have stood our ground on our relationship with Russia. Without putting in jeopardy our relationship with the Western allies, and that's quite remarkable. And even very recently, there was a statement, I think it was yesterday or day before yesterday, from the ambassador of Germany here in New Delhi, saying that what India does, it's its own decision with respect to oil and all. So our position has actually progressively gained acceptance from our Western friends as well.
Right.
So I think it was done very well. Prime Minister has stood his ground, and the External Affairs Minister especially has articulated India's positions in polite but very firm terms, and I think overall, we stand in a better spot than we did about a year ago in terms of our standing in the global political equation.
Right. So, post the war, geopolitical equations have transformed dramatically. We are looking at a world where China's clout, power, whatever you might call it, has diminished, so much so that campaigns are being built around boycotting China, whether it's the United States, whether it is even India. So that's one aspect of it. You're looking at world economy not being able to grow beyond 2 to 3%. So in that situation, Dr. Panagariya, when you look at the challenges that India will have to tackle with, what according to you are the issues that it needs to be cognizant of, mindful of?
Well, India is a rising power, whereas obviously the United States is the conventional, now at least since the Second World War, the established power. And China is the more recently risen power, I would say. So that's the sort of where we kind of stand now, and on economic terms, we are going to go from fifth largest to the third largest in the next decade, and so the position of India, I think, is going to rise in both the global economy, but also geopolitically. That's where we kind of stand.
Sure.
And our challenge really, is going to be the one that we are trying to navigate currently, which is that our generally, our conventional policy has been not to be the allies with any single power, but at the same time maintain friendly relations. So clearly there are going to be pressures from the United States, particularly, perhaps less so from Europe, but certainly from the United States. But usually Europeans fall in line with the United States once the United States has made its position clear.
Right.
So there will be pressure, therefore, for us to be clearly kind of in their camp, and that, of course, can come at the cost of compromising the full independence that India has conventionally asserted.
Right.
And so that, I think, is going to be our big challenge.
Absolutely. So, because India just placed a phenomenal order of 400 aircrafts, and President Joe Biden came out and said that this one order will create 1 million American jobs, and it's going to the statement said that it's going to lead to deeper economic engagement between India and the United States. Also, we do know that Russia would want India to be on its side, while the West is going to pull India in their direction. And considering this is the year of India's G20 presidency, we are going to be hosting world leaders. What would be your advice in managing the optics, managing these very crucial relationships?
No. Who am I to advise Prime Minister Modi? I think, he is the master of this diplomacy. I can only recall that, at the last G20 summit, which was in Indonesia, it was Prime Minister Modi who actually ensured that all 20 countries came together to carry the communique through. There had been some difficulties there, precisely along the lines of Russia versus the United States, and in the end, it was Prime Minister who mediated, and this is something that the United States administration has actually publicly acknowledged. So
right.
it's not, from our side, there is actually never such claims are never made. That's not Prime Minister's style. In fact, I mean, I remember one time I had said something in the press about something that was actually the outcome of a suggestion by Prime Minister Modi. This was in the context of the German presidency, and I got a call from the Prime Minister's office that, did you say this? And so I said, I'm afraid I did. So I was asked, where did you get the information? So I said, I got it from the German side. So I said, why, what's the problem? So so I was told that, Prime Minister's office wanted to make sure that Germans don't think that we are trying to run away with the credit. So the Prime Minister's style is different one. But in this case, we know that the confirmation actually had come from the United States. So I think, we will do well. It is also the style of the Prime Minister to really push for some of the issues that he believes in. Conventionally in negotiations, what has been the case is that often all the proposals are put by the Western countries, and we are then generally drawing our red lines that what we don't want. Often we kind of shy away from saying what do we actually want. But in this case, clearly, and then one area where Prime Minister has actually been, well, even earlier in the earlier G20 presidencies, for example, the agenda on terrorism was very much kind of pushed by the Prime Minister, and this is during some of the communiques that I had negotiated. But also in the current one, we know that the LIFE initiative is very much Prime Minister's initiative,
Right.
which I think is a fantastic initiative to take. It has very much a kind of Indian touch to that,
Right.
and it is something that that India can actually take to the Western countries, where West actually lags. I mean, in terms of not only bringing in alternative supplies of energy, green energy and so forth to replace the fossil fuel energy, but also to cut the demand. I mean, there are two ways to reduce the addition to the carbon that exists in the atmosphere. One is to bring in the green energy, but the other is to simply reduce our demand. And certainly there is plenty of scope on the western side to reduce the demand for energy by controlling how much energy is spent on running air conditioning, how much energy is spent running, keeping the lights on during night when there is nobody in the building, that sort of thing. So lifestyle changes are, I think, quite important also, which is really traditional for India. If you look at our cultural heritage, it's really, that we always want to minimize, I mean, efficiency in a way in what we consume.
Fair enough. Dr. Panagariya, I also wanted to get your thoughts on the aircraft order that was placed by Air India. Does that catapult India's image, when it comes to the new geopolitical landscape? What does it do for India, when it comes to be seen as a country that's actually providing business to other countries that are at the top, are the most powerful countries in the world?
Yeah, no, I think this was, in terms of symbolism, I think this was a major kind of event, and it's really satisfying in a way for me as an Indian, that it was seen as such. So in fact, I mean, it's not President Biden alone who came in and said some nice things about it, but we also had the French President Macron come in, and somewhat unexpectedly, even the Prime Minister of UK, Rishi Sunak, he said that, well, these will generate demand for also the components that the United Kingdom produces, and therefore it's going to create jobs in the United Kingdom as well. So what more can you ask for? The three major countries of the world, only one left is Germany, I suppose. So it's very good, but I hope that what we are seeing is just the beginning of a process, that at 3 trillion plus today, we are capable, and our private sector is sort of becoming so capable that it now operates on a scale which is noticed not just by the business world but by the political world as well, and that the similar impactful actions on the economic front are to come now in the next decade on a similar scale, much higher frequency. So in a way, I think for a very long time the base of our economy had been rather small, and so even when we grew, people don't realize, for about 17-18 years, starting from 2003, we had grown about 7% a year. But the impact on the global economy is not so large because the base at which we started in 2003 was very small. Today that base is now 3.3, 3.4 trillion dollars, and that when that base kind of grows at 7 or 8%, is going to have an impact. I mean, this is exactly what when you go back to China in the early 2000s onwards, that's the sort of impact that China began to have, and hopefully that same story will be repeated in the coming 1 to 2 decades by India.
So, the Prime Minister has termed this period from here on as Amrit Kal. Yes. We spoke about China's decade, and we have been, China's rise has been exponential, and there has been a lot of discussion and conversation around it. For India has constantly tried to benchmark itself against China, whether it's building Mumbai next to Beijing, or whether it is building another Hong Kong in India. So we've always constantly benchmarked ourselves against China. Now, with a lot of anti-China sentiment that's brewing across the world, a lot of companies are exploring, a lot of global giants are exploring China +1 strategy. In your view, are we well poised to take on that sentiment to make sure that that sentiment fructifies into investments coming in? And what do we really need to do to be able to ride this wave right now?
Yeah. So I think a lot of the components of what is required are in place or are being put in place.
Okay.
Most importantly, infrastructure that has really gathered momentum in the recent years. So that's something that is essential, at which the foreign investors look at. We have been improving our processes, but I think that's still work in progress. Foreign investors do find it a little difficult. They see India as a rather challenging place to invest in. So we need to continue to kind of deregulate, make our processes more friendly. In effect, anybody who doesn't have an Indian partner finds it hard to navigate the processes in India. So that Prime Minister Modi has, this has been his agenda from the beginning, ease of doing business and all the rest. But I think still progress is required on that front. Very importantly, I think, I go back to my kind of favorite theme of international trade. I think there we have a good bit of work to do because we have raised protection levels, and in today's global economy, particularly when the multinationals are the ones that you are trying to court. Now multinationals, they are happy to have access to the Indian market,
Sure.
which is now about $3.4 trillion, so it's a large market. But that's not their main target. Their main target is the global economy.
Right.
Therefore, they have to be, when they locate themselves in India, they have to be competitive in the global economy. Now, if a lot of the components, etc., that they import from abroad have to pay these high custom duties, and also because of the other entry barriers, if that creates friction for the entry and exit of either the components or the products and so forth, that raises the cost and that renders them uncompetitive in the global marketplace. So they have to do that calculation, and we really need to be far more liberal on our trade barriers than we are currently. Part of that strategy also has to be the free trade agreements with the major countries of the world.
Right.
Now, we have negotiated some free trade agreements, but these are still relatively smaller countries, UAE and Australia. But the bigger ones are yet to be done. The United Kingdom, which is more like more of a $3 trillion economy, but of course the much larger economy of Europe. Right? That European Union FTA is also under negotiation, but we need to move on to that rapidly as well. Because ultimately, you see, if you are going to be the hub of a supply chain,
Right.
Inputs and outputs have to be able to move without much friction in a very large kind of more or less free trade area.
Right.
And that is where the free trade agreements are extremely helpful. It's not an accident that China became the hub, not only because it was large, it was a supplier of large labor force. These are things that we also have. But in addition, when China joined the WTO in the year 2003, or was it 2001, I think. But so when China 2003, when they joined the World Trade Organization, as a part of the negotiation, there was a lot of liberalization that China had to accept, and the tariff levels really, in the years that followed, tariff levels came down, and today China's market, even if forget the free trade agreements that it has with several of the countries in Asia, particularly, but its own external tariffs generally are extremely low. And that, of course, makes the ability of China to serve as the hub for the global supply, for the supply chains, very, very much.
So India, for the past 2 years, has followed a policy of increasing tariffs, import tariffs, right? We saw that happen in this budget as well. And the counter to that is that India wants to encourage domestic capacities to be built to supply those components or products or parts to companies. Also the thought is that if they are able to do that, it will reduce their import bill. It will also reduce their dependence on other countries. And so, but you're saying that argument does not serve the purpose.
No, it does not. It does not, because even it doesn't serve our purpose, because you see, countries' resources are limited, capital is limited. And one thing which I'll just say, which is not so easily understood, is the fact that in terms of total capital available, foreign capital can augment that capital only to the extent you are willing to run for the current account deficit. The current account deficit is the exact measure of how much foreign capital you are absorbing. Because basically it's a measure of the debt you are creating abroad, net debt that you are creating abroad. That's what it measures, which is exactly what you are borrowing to add to your domestically available savings.
Sure.
So that is the point. Now you can't run very large current account deficits, because that's throws off your macro. Reserve Bank of India is not going to let that current account deficit rise more than 2 to 3% of the GDP. That's absolute maximum.
Right.
So you got a limited amount of capital, right? Domestic savings plus the current accounts deficit.
Sure.
That's your overall savings available. Now, it is your decision now where you want to allocate that capital. If you say that, okay, I'm going to impose these import barriers to encourage these otherwise inefficient industries to produce more, well, fine, the capital will go into those industries. Well, where is it going to come out of? It's going to come out of the export industries.
Fair enough, yeah.
So your exports will decline. So it's not like what you're doing. A simple principle is that incentivization of certain sectors is disincentivization of the remaining sectors. Whether you do it through subsidy or you do it through protection, there is no free lunch here. And what you want to do is incentivize, or at least keep a neutral regime so that your exports can flourish.
Right.
If your exports are flourishing, anyway you can import more. What is the problem? Ultimately, the jobs are coming from not from these or those sectors growing. It's coming from the overall size of the economy. And it is the overall size of the economy that you want to grow. And for that, you want to grow your most efficient industries, industries which absorb your resources and produce at a lower cost. And frankly speaking, anyway, our big resource available at a low cost is labor.
That's right.
And so when you are encouraging these very heavy capital industries, if you look at PLI industries, for example, all very capital intensive industries, then you are not using your most abundant resource effectively. I mean, China, if you said that we are trying to follow China, but we are not. Actually, China was the most effective at using its labor. I mean, in the end, it said, okay, let's whatever capital we got to spread it over a larger labor absorption. That so that a large amount of labor gets to work with some capital. But what we are doing by encouraging these very heavily capital intensive industries is that most of the capital is being used up by industries that use very few workers. The rest of the workers have no capital to work with. Their productivity remains abysmally low.
Fair enough.
And this is where the micro and small industries, they are employing most of the workers. So this is the area that we need to think through. Ultimately, we need to encourage, and if the multinationals are going to come, we are courting them, then let them export as much as they can or they want to. So let them use our both skilled and unskilled labor on the largest possible scale and export out into this fantastically large global marketplace.
Okay.
And that will generate enough export revenues for us to be able to import other things.
I want to talk to you about dealing with China. There is a lot of anti-China sentiment even within the country. There are murmurs about sanctions against China. We've seen an economic backlash also against China, whether it comes to banning of apps that are by Chinese companies, or companies in India that have got Chinese funding. They've been blocked from entering into very strategic sectors. Do you think this is the India's approach in dealing with China is right, or do you think we can be a little more aggressive, or do we need to be a little less aggressive?
Well, I think we are doing it just right. My take on this is that, you know, where we see a direct threat from China to our national security, we should take the necessary action, which is exactly what we have done. You know, where we saw, for example, some of these apps were creating, carrying the threats to the domestics, to the security, we have banned those apps. Likewise, if there are any investments that are coming to the country which pose some sort of threat, then I think, you know, but otherwise we should stay open. I think it's premature to start discontinuing trade with China.
Okay.
That's not in our interest, you know. Ultimately, look, I mean, just think a little bit, this connects back to your earlier question,
right,
that if multinationals are going to move here, they got to be able to import components. You know, no matter how much we want them to produce components here as well, that's not going to happen, because, you know, if they start doing that too quickly, the cost will be high, and they'll be then displaced from the global marketplace. So they have to be able to, you know, bring in these components, and a lot of those suppliers of the components are in China. So let's face it, you know, in our own interest, actually, it doesn't make sense to impose restrictions on imports from China, so long as they pose no direct security threat to us.
So a case-by-case basis, not allowing.
No, by and large, I think our policy should be to allow trade to flow with China, and just look for where a security threat might exist, and just act on in those areas. But for the rest of it, I think, you know, we should, I would say, actually, generally speaking, I have been saying in my earlier answers as well, that we need to lower our trade barriers, you know, even, and that may mean goods coming from China enter also with lower tariffs, because, you know, tariffs have to be lowered under the WTO rules in a non-discriminatory sort of way. You can't lower them on somebody else and not against China, unless you are doing free trade agreement. That's a different story.
Right.
And so, you know, but that is what we really need to do. I mean, we have to basically grow rapidly, become larger and larger. You know, once we are a $10 trillion economy, our ability to influence the world events and everything else will be, you know, multiplied manifold from what it is today. That's what we ought to do. I mean, this ultimately goes back to the strategy of Deng Xiaoping in China, that, you know, bide your time, wait for your time to come.
Okay.
And so, you know,
I want to come in here and ask you. You know, you wrote an article saying that India will become the third largest economy by 2027-28. What are you basing that on? And by when will India become a $10 trillion economy?
Okay, the first one is straightforward, actually. First one is very straightforward. So if you look back, you know, India's nominal growth in dollar terms, you know, you just convert at the going exchange rate, convert the GDP into dollars and calculate the growth rate. That comes out about 7.4%.
Okay.
So currently we are $3.4 trillion, and if you know, do no better than what you have done in the past already. This is the growth pre-COVID.
Sure.
You know, obviously, the 3 years of COVID, you can't include that. So that 7.4% is coming from, in nominal dollars, it's coming from pre-COVID years, 2014 to 2019-20. And you project that, you know, by 27-28, you become something like 5.2 or 5.3 trillion dollars.
Okay.
That's enough to cross both Germany and Japan. So that's the.
So you're still holding on to that?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
But that will happen, you know, because
even with the world recession, there's a war going on.
Oh yeah. Because see, war in a way still it's a limited war. You know, look, I mean, if the war becomes where the US gets involved or China gets involved and all, this is a totally different game. But I just go by the assumption that, there will still remain a limited engagement between the Ukraine and and Russia. So that as far as the global recession, I think, we are not looking at the facts for one thing. I've been saying this, that every time there was global recession, but each time then you look at what happened to the US economy, it's net job addition actually always ends up being positive. And today the US actually has virtually the lowest unemployment rate that it has had. Right. I mean, it's true that the tech industry has lost about a couple of 100,000 jobs,
right.
And that has echoes in India because a lot of those 200,000 workers are actually Indians. But if you look at the net change, net United States economy is still adding about 500,000 workers per month or so. It did actually, at least in the last figure that I've seen, about 512,000 jobs. So, so first that, but let's say recession actually happens, even if I have no problem, let's assume that. What we are looking at is a very, very large global economy. The export market has grown, just the merchandise exports, the pre-COVID peak was about 19 trillion, that was in 2018.
Right.
Today we have gone to 25 trillion. If you look at 2022, from 19, it has gone to 25 trillion. And so 2021 it was 22 trillion, 2022 it became 25 trillion. That's a bloody large export market. Sure. Even if it doesn't grow or even if it shrinks a little bit, if it shrinks back to 22 trillion. Our challenge is not, whether this is growing or not growing. Our challenge is, can we not carve out a slightly thicker slice of that market? I mean, currently we have got less than 2%. Let us, try to make it first 3 and then 4%. That I think is enough for us. So my take has always been that what happens to us in the coming decades depends not so much as on what happens to the global economy, but what do we do here domestically in terms of our policies.
So ports is a crucial aspect in making this success story, the export success story. The sense that I've gotten from experts is that our capacity at the ports also needs to be expanded to be able to build or to be able to cater to the world. So that's one aspect, besides ease of doing business, besides just essentially unleashing the animal spirits, as it were. When from your vantage point, and as somebody who's constantly interacting with global investors, and you live in New York, what are the 3 key things that are not working for India right now, or are concerns or red flags with India right now when it comes for India to be realizing its full potential?
Yeah, no, I think we are still a little bit behind the curve on this. Because my former colleague at Columbia was here about a year ago, less than a year ago. This is Amit Khandelwal, who actually had been as a part of a project convening the meetings with the big US investors. He's in the business school, and he was saying here in June last year that he always asks them, is India on your list of countries to which you are going? And he said, at that time hardly anybody was mentioning that India was a very high priority country for them to go to.
Okay.
So I think while something so it's possible that some of the potential investors into India were not present in his group of investors, but it was a large these were large groups, and there was more than one group that he was convening. So I think there is an issue here, and that issue is related to as we have discussed the general business atmosphere, where I think business atmosphere for the Indian domestic investors is fantastic. They know how to navigate the system. Foreign investors have greater difficulty in navigating the system, and they also, by the way, a lot of the Indian entrepreneurs are looking at the Indian market primarily as their primary market, whereas the multinationals look at the global market. So they look at our trade regime, they look at our investment rules, how do the regulators kind of react before investment has happened and after investment has happened, and those sorts of things, if the rules are changed, midway after the investment has happened, that gets them worried, prospects of those things happening. So all this, you need policy stability, you need liberal policies, you need good infrastructure. I mean, I would also pitch for, bringing pitch for particularly building up our coastal regions a bit more, both infrastructurally and in terms of policy regime. This is the context in which I've argued sometimes for these special coastal zones or employment zones or what have you, that, where you can really liberalize the rules for the goods to come in without friction, to be processed in India and then to be shipped back to the global marketplace.
Right.
I mean, that was the major actually mechanism Chinese used. That on the coastal Chinese, South China and Eastern China, basically they really opened it up. Multinationals would come in and they
just come in there,
process them
and take it from there.
Take it out.
Yeah.
I don't think they worry too much about whether you are producing components in my country or not. Because remember, if you are operating the marketplace, anything you export is worth billions and billions of dollars. So if you got even a thin slice of it, so even if we are doing only 10% of the value added,
sure,
it's a lot of total value added. I mean, all the devices that Apple produces in China, people say, oh, but Chinese are adding only about 10% of the value to those devices. Yeah, but that's a 10% on, let's say, a couple of 100 million devices, which are all very high value devices.
Absolutely.
So, let's say it's a $1,000 device, and on a $1,000 device you got 10%, that's $100 per device. And if you're 200 million, you can do the maths. I think it's a very large value added you are doing. That is why I always argued that look, let's not get, it's not an issue whether you're how much value you're adding per unit. I mean, think of it, anybody could really, through protection and whatever else, subsidies, etc., could produce an entire aircraft.
Right.
Domestically.
Fair enough.
But at what cost?
Yeah.
If this is so bloody, it's at 10 times the cost, you're not going to be able to sell it to anybody.
Fair point.
So whereas, if you do even, let's say, 10% of the value added to an aircraft, but all the global aircraft that are produced, whatever their number is, they take that 10% from you. That's a very large total value added.
Right.
That's what we have to really, and that's how the current global value chains have come to configure. Nobody is adding a huge amount of value, but they are adding a little bit of value to a very large number of units.
Fair enough.
That's how it is.
Fair enough. Dr. Panagariya, you were one of the first people to call out BJP's win in 2019 when you said that the Modi government will come back with a big majority. No one anticipated the kind of win that the BJP government saw in 2019. We are just about a year away from elections. This is also a heavy state election year. I want to ask you, what's your sense? What will the Modi government do in 2024, and what are the factors that are working for it, and if there's something that they need to be mindful of?
It's an interesting question you ask, actually, and you refer to 2019. So there is an interesting story behind that. First, let me tell you that, and I come back to. So I wrote that article in 2019, April 4, and a lot of people really sort of said, "Oh, what are you thinking?" Because the narrative, at least in the press, media, uniformly was that it's probable that BJP will end up with only 220 seats, and there was a lot of speculation that then compromise candidate may become Gadkari or something, but none of that happened. So I had written that, actually, which my own assessment, even sitting in New York, was completely opposite, and this is based on a lot of analysis and all. So I had written that article. This article appeared in the Times of India on April 4th of 2019, and I happened to be in India on the day the article came, and I also happened to have an appointment with the Prime Minister to see him. So I went to when I went to see him that morning. So Prime Minister smiled and said, "Yeah, you have written today about our victory," but he said that you know what, and he said this in Hindi. So he said, you know, मेरा ये मानना है कि हम पिछली से भी ज़्यादा मेजॉरिटी के साथ जीत कर आएंगे. So this was his confidence, and actually, while I would like to think that I was pretty accurate, he was even more accurate because the majority with which they came was a little larger, and BJP on its own in 2019 got the absolute majority.
Right.
So I still think that they will repeat what happened in 2019, at least as of now. You know, I will write my assessment hopefully when we get closer to that election.
Sure.
But at the moment, I see that pretty much the factors that I had written on in 2019 remain valid. I mean, I said there that the most important factor is the Prime Minister himself. I mean, his immense popularity, and you would think that after 10 years, or right now it's about 9 years, popularity would decline. But that in Prime Minister Modi's case is the opposite thing. Actually, he's gained in popularity, and if I compare to 2019, not only his personal popularity has increased, but actually today the opposition looks even more fragmented than it did in 2019. So Congress is largely sort of diminished yet more. Even though the party leadership thinks that the Bharat Jodo Yatra of Mr. Rahul Gandhi has actually revived it and so forth. So we'll see what happens, but at least to me it doesn't appear that way. I think in 2019 I had also written that the BJP had compared to, so I was comparing it also to 2004 election, which they had lost. Prime Minister Vajpayee was the Prime Minister at the time, and
Right.
Rather surprisingly they had lost that election, and I'd said that in 2019 article that that the government had learned from that experience and held on to their allies and so forth. In terms of forging partnership with the other parties, they were hanging on. I mean, in 2004 they had let go of DMK at that time, and that was 14 votes going from here to there, so that makes a difference of 28, and when you become minus, they become plus, it's a difference of 28. So that alone actually was enough to upset the apple cart of Prime Minister Vajpayee. So I think that also the navigation of the Modi-led BJP of the alliances is generally good. They're built up much more. Now they have also increased their footprint across the country. If you look at 2014, their existing footprint was in many states they had no footprint.
Sure.
All that has gone up, and above all, the delivery on the delivery, people trust Prime Minister Modi. That
Any specific states, Dr. Panagariya, where you think that the BJP government has made strong inroads or have really worked to make their presence count?
Look, I think for them, given the scale of the 2019 victory,
Right.
the challenge had been to retain their popularity in the states where they already had made inroads.
Sure.
Right? I mean, for example, I remember in 2019 there's a lot of speculation that UP they may lose a lot of the seats that they
Right.
had won in 2014. That didn't happen. And I think, once again, I don't see any reason why, they would lose any seats in UP in a state. A very large contributor, about almost 80 seats are in play in a single state. So it's not so much, it's in where they have actually acquired, Northeast, for example, they have really, 2014, zero footprint of the BJP in the Northeast.
In states like Madhya Pradesh, there's been a BJP government for 3 successive terms, I think. Do you think they could face an anti-incumbency there?
So now this is the state level elections
Right.
about which we are talking. Now state level elections are a little different.
Sure.
I was speaking to the parliamentary elections.
Fair enough.
And there I think one has got to know a bit more. So I would rather not speculate on the state level elections. I don't know enough details. Certainly, in a state particularly, anti-incumbency, it can matter. It really ultimately, I am a firm believer that governments that do deliver do come back. And the absolutely the prime example of that is Naveen Patnaik in Orissa, who has been complete Mr. Teflon, as far as anti-incumbency factors are concerned.
Fair enough.
So governments that deliver, and that's really what is happening in the center also.
So you don't expect an anti-incumbency. You don't think that there is this whole narrative, that's coming from the western part of the world, whether it's the Hindenburg report targeting the Adani group and the opposition raising the issue of the proximity between the BJP government and the Adanis, or the BBC documentary showing India, showing the Indian Prime Minister, as a non-democratic leader, or George Soros commenting on India as, saying that our democracy is flawed and hopefully India will be able to come back to its democratic ideals. So you don't think that narrative will break into India and could break that whole pro-government wave right now?
Yeah, you narrated the sequence of things that have been in the news and all, right? I mean, you think about it. Each time there's a new narrative gets built up. That tells you that none of these is actually getting any traction. So each time then you have a new one. So I mean, if really it got traction, you wouldn't need
one thing
every 2 weeks or 3 weeks, something to be brought out. And it's not just the Western, also there's enough among the elite. There are enough detractors of Prime Minister Modi.
Right.
So a lot of this has to do with also, one suspects that a lot of this also has to do with the stories originating here being picked up by the Western media, and then our media picking back the look, Western media is also saying this. But whereas Western media is probably picking up something that's going on in the Indian media in the first place. But that's fair enough. That's a fair game in a democracy. And I'm pretty sure the government is up to it. But
do you think India is dealing with it the right way, though?
Sorry?
Do you think India is dealing with it the right way?
Oh, I think so. Clearly India's standing globally has been on the rise. There is no question. These criticisms will come through, and this is always any country. As it gains in importance. It should be prepared to face that kind of criticism and all. It's a good thing, we are a democracy, so we.
But does it warrant cabinet ministers jumping in and talking about or calling out, say, a George Soros? Do you think that was needed?
I think we are generally measured, and on these things, you notice that Prime Minister doesn't speak.
Right.
And for somebody like the External Affairs Minister, it's completely fair for the External Affairs Ministers to weigh in on these things. Somebody has to, obviously, otherwise you get more criticism saying that the government is completely silent, which means that they accept the criticism. And I think the External Affairs Minister has been absolutely tremendous, and he also has a very good understanding, I must say, of how to kind of respond in a way that will gain traction on the Western side as well.
Sure.
And he stands his ground, and so that I think is fair game.
Okay.
But to the larger point, that is this going to impact the elections? You see, in the Delhi chatter. All this has a lot of traction.
Okay.
But ultimately look at what is the viewership of these television news programs outside of Delhi,
right?
Or Greater Delhi. You can define whichever you want to define, but it's also large. Ultimately the votes are spread all over the country, and the average voter of India is not judging Prime Minister by the Delhi chatter. The average voter is really judging the Prime Minister by what they are experiencing on the ground.
So I want to ask you about that. If you were to identify 3 big flagship schemes of the Modi government that you feel have been transformational, which will bring people back to voting for this government, if that happens, what would they be?
Yeah, I think that's a little hard thing to do because there are several. So
give me your topics.
But I mean, I think in terms of longer term impact on the lives of the people, and if I really think in those terms, then I think of the schemes that are incredibly hard to implement on scale, and Prime Minister has actually done it. There may be imperfections here and there, but by and large he has done it. So clearly the first one I pick here is the Swachh Bharat.
Okay.
I recall, I was not in the government yet at that time. This was the first 15th of August speech by the Prime Minister, and this was I was in New York, obviously, which is where I live, and it was late at night, and I was watching the speech. And when he announced that, I said, my heart sort of sank at the time, because I said, how is he going to do it in 5 years? I mean, we still had that 38, 39% houses having toilets in rural India. But boy, he did it. 5 years, and practically, so you can still argue that, so it may not be 100%, but 85, 90%. Taking 38 to 90, it's a big, huge deal. So that's one clearly on scale. The second, I would say, again on scale, I mean, in terms of the scale, sheer scale, the bank accounts, which eventually, I say that because bank accounts by themselves are not so valuable, but having those bank accounts ultimately in the context of a billion telephones in the hands of the people became a very powerful instrument of making these transfers, etc., eliminating corruption and all. I just really fold into this the bank accounts, also the expansion of Aadhaar. Aadhaar was launched obviously by the UPA government, but ultimately it's the Prime Minister who completed it at speed, about bringing about 1 billion Aadhaar cards. And so the whole jam trinity is what I'm referring to, so that together. Third one that I would point out, as I said, it still leaves out a lot of very important initiatives, but third one I would point out from the people's lives perspective is what is in progress right now, which is Nal Se Jal. The water, I think that's a, and I take particular kind of satisfaction in this, because from the very beginning, 2015, when I went for my first kind of quiet kind of meeting one-on-one with the Prime Minister, I'd gone with some proposals to him, and one of the things I mentioned was this water issue. I said, look, what I tried to convey to the Prime Minister was that water is something, whether rich or poor or middle class, impacts everybody's life. And having 24/7 supply of water, tap water, I think ultimately would transform everybody. I'm sure he knew everything, so really he didn't need anybody to tell him. But since I sort of did tell him, so and after that, actually, every 15th of August that came, we got asked to give a larger proposal. We worked with Param Iyer also at the time, who was doing Swachh Bharat and all. So we had been floating till 2017, when after which I had left. 2017 we submitted a very big proposal. Largely, I think Param Iyer was the person who prepared it, but in consultation with us. But I think that was at that time Swachh Bharat was still going on. I didn't quite understand at the time. I said, the Prime Minister is asking us for this, but it doesn't get announced. Why is that? But I think 2019, once Swachh Bharat was done, then he announced this. So it was clearly on his agenda. So that's, I think, the other one I would say of the three.
that
now,
have
as I said,
impacted?
for
Sure.
example, in terms of impact, at least one more I would say is the cooking gas. I think
Yeah.
that's very transformational for the women, both water and gas. Because
Absolutely.
that's
And toilets, they all three
in
impact
toilets, all
women.
three actually.
Yeah, all three impact
and,
women.
and rural women in particular,
Yeah.
who really have to bear the lot of the burden of the life, everyday life. All three kind of bring a huge amount of convenience to them. So those are the things I think, and a lot of the Indian men's votes get determined by the women.
That which is again a reversal from how it used to be. A lot of women used to vote according to how their men were voting, but it's interesting that those things also have changed. I'm going to ask you, Dr. Panagariya, if you want to make a guess on how many seats do you think will the BJP be able to get? Will they surpass their previous tally, or will they be around that much, or a little lower than that?
Okay, I think let's wait for that. Because if I say it today, after all, it's a
You will really be the first one then to call it out.
I'm willing to say that
Sure.
largely the Prime Minister will retain his current majority.
Okay.
But beyond that, I don't. So approximately he'll retain his current majority.
Fair
But
enough.
but I think it's a little early to speculate on the number of seats and all. Because it's a dynamic situation, how things evolve in the next remaining time. So last time also I wrote in April, after all, it was a month
Sure.
before.
Sure,
So-
fair enough.
so I'll wait.
We hope that you'll write for us in Moneycontrol. We would love to get your perspective on this. My last question before we wind up the interview. Even as we speak, there is a meeting of central bank governors of the G20 countries happening in Bangalore. Finance ministers of different countries are also going to be meeting. There's a big meeting. The final G20 meet will happen in Delhi in September. I want to get your thoughts in on what should be the agenda that India needs to push for at the G20.
Well, having been India Sherpa for 3 years, I generally kind of don't speak a whole lot on G20. But perhaps I'll mention one thing. Well, because my experience of working with the Prime Minister is that ultimately he has a very good sense of what India should pitch for. But one part of it that I really think is admirable and he's pushing and we should push is his whole idea of life, the lifestyle. Adjustment of lifestyle to contribute to preserving the environment and climate change. I think there is a lot of room for it, particularly on the Western countries. It is something as it sort of fits in with the Indian tradition. That we, the Indian tradition really encourages living in harmony with the environment, and therefore, if that means adjusting one's own lifestyle so that the environment is preserved, but ultimately, you are preserving the environment for yourself too. And that there is a fair bit of recognition of that in the Indian tradition. So there is something that India can bring to the Western countries, where generally affluence has meant that you can really live a lavish life, and so you have these phenomena of air conditioning being running through big buildings while nobody is in the building, or
Right.
lights being on while nobody is there, through the night and so forth, while nobody is in the working in the buildings and so forth. Even when you leave your office, turn the lights off. That's those sorts
Right.
of things. I think this needs to be amplified, and who else better than India to amplify that message? And this is India's time in G20 to amplify, because I felt that, and there's full recognition of it in the reports that the successive panels of the United Nations have actually been submitting.
Right.
That on the one hand, you want to replace the existing fossil fuel sources of energy by non-fossil fuel sources. So solar and wind and green hydrogen, etc., etc. But they also say that you cannot really get there being what needs
Sure.
to be done without also without also bringing some control on the demand for energy. We also have to work, so
Okay.
it's not only the supply side that the adjustment is required,
Sure.
demand side also the adjustment
So
is
India
required.
needs to teach the world how to effectively use energy, because we already have very efficient energy practices in terms of how we consume electricity and how we generally lead our lives.
Yeah, no, I mean, and I'm sort of reminded actually that this business, when we were growing up, anytime the light was on in the room and nobody was in the room, my father would get very upset.
Yes,
Why are you
yes.
wasting
My
energy?
grandfather did too,
Now,
yes. Yeah.
in those days, it's possible that it was
Yeah.
required by your personal considerations itself.
No, we
because,
still need it, because in summer we still have power cuts. Clearly, our capacity is not meeting the demand that India.
No, that is true. Yeah, yeah.
So-
But I remember that we were made very conscious by our father that if you're not in the room, why the light is on, that sort of thing. So it's a part of our ethos,
Right.
and I think that's something that we can actually take to the rest of the world.
Sure. My final question, Dr. Panagariya. I've always admired how you're so cool in all situations, right? I've seen you through many years now, and I feel like you have tremendous amount of humility, and you're always able to, you've dealt with the world really, but you always keep your calm and you're always very focused about whatever you're doing, and I think our younger viewers would really benefit from this. As an academician, as somebody who's also been a political appointee, how do you manage to stay focused to your purpose? And what would be your advice for a lot of younger viewers who are watching you, who want to build a career of credibility and integrity?
Well, I think integrity is very important. So there is no question about it. And a part of that integrity is always to speak truths as you see it. At the end of the day, in the short term, saying, putting forward falsehood may gain you advantage, in the very short term. But oftentimes the falsehood always leads to counter questions and so forth, and you eventually get caught. And also to maintain the falsehood, you have to be constantly then thinking through that. It might come out. So I have a clear policy: always tell the truth, or just refuse to answer.
But typically, sir, what's your schedule like?
So I think being truthful, it also becomes very stress free, because at the time you say it may be a little difficult, but in the longer term it helps, because then you are not having to worry about things coming out later on or something. So that's, I think it is an important, in terms of the life, organization of life. This is, I think, to me it's very important. But other than that, clearly you need to work very hard. You need to be persistent. Those are success, no matter how bright you are, in the end, without hard work and persistence, you can't succeed in life. I mean, succeed, if you want to make a big success, a decent life you can have, but to truly succeed, I think.
And how do you stay grounded?
You need to, and so so basically, I mean,
What keeps you grounded?
No, I think these are the things that I remain focused. I also keep my faith. Faith in the sense that everybody has failures in life, and not everything that you are hoping come your way need to come. But at the same time, I think the luck is also. I mean, one also needs some good luck for things to happen.
Sure.
Particularly somebody like me, I never seek anything. So for me, things have to happen. When they happen, I take them. I was. The opportunity to work at Niti Aayog came through, and when it came through, I took it. I mean, I didn't say that, oh, this is beyond me or something. I said, I'll go and try. If I fail, I'll fail. But at the same time, I never sought. But if you are able to more aggressively pursue, that's good too. But the point is that luck is randomly distributed in my experience,
Okay.
and so sometimes you don't get it, and so you get disappointed. But generally, I have found that something does come eventually. Luck does turn around and come and good things come your way.
Okay.
So stay focused, stay
the course.
basically keep working at it.
Okay.
Also choose to do things for which you have passion. I think if you haven't got passion, then you will not be able to deliver. So trying to do things that for which you don't have passion generally is not going to work. So for me, what I do, I absolutely thoroughly enjoy doing, and that helps.
Okay, all right. Thank you very much. It was a pleasure speaking with you, and we hope to see more of you in Delhi.
Fantastic. Thank you, Shweta.
Thank you.
Always a pleasure to speak with.